from the Brawley Group. Larry Marzicano is going to speak to you, and then I'll speak at the end again. And then we're going to do a demo outside, which you're welcome to stay for or not stay for, depending on how your morning's going. So, a little bit of what this is going to look like. I'm going to talk a little bit about the origins of Cream Hill Lake, why, where, when, what, and how we monitor. I'll talk a little bit about the current state of the lake's health and how we can be good stewards of the lake. So I just thought you might be interested to know that what we call a lake like Cream Hill Lake is a kettle lake. It comes from glacial fluvial processes. So about 11,000 years ago, the Wisconsin ice sheet had reached its maximal terminus, and then it began receding after that. And as it receded, it left giant ice blocks. It's called calving when glaciers lose these big ice blocks. They sit on the ground as the glacier continues to recede. They're so heavy, they push down into the ground, and they also begin to melt. So eventually they've reached below the ground, below the level, and the sediment is on top now of this giant block of ice. And then eventually the water melts, it all caves in, and what you're left with is a lake, like our lake. Our lake has an inlet and an outlet, so it's a kettle lake. If it had no inlet or outlet, we'd call it a kettle pond or a kettle hole. Will it always be here? It won't, because kettle lakes have a lifespan, and over time, over thousands of years, they fill with sediment and organic matter, and eventually become bogs and wetlands and disappear. So part of the reason we want to monitor and know what's happening is so that we can prolong the life of our lake as long as possible. There's no chance it's disappearing in our lifetime, but we still want to keep it healthy. Okay, welcome. I'm sorry I just started right on time.
We need some more chairs.
Yeah, Jane.
We can go stand in the back.
Yeah, we have more chairs. Yeah. Somehow I thought we were complete.
Who needs a chair? All right.
For those of you who came in late, you didn't really miss anything. We're just introducing today Heidi on the Lake Task Force. Larry, our limnologist, is going to be speaking in a minute, and we were just talking about how this is a kettle lake. So when we measure the health of the lake, we have a couple of...
Quiet down.
Sorry. Oh, no, not at all. It's totally my fault. I should have waited. I don't know why I just felt like, I got to start. When we measure the health of the lake, there are three big trophic levels that we talk about. Oligotrophic is what you call a very healthy lake. It's characterized by high dissolved oxygen, clear waters, low nutrient load, low sediment load, and low to no invasive organisms. And then we move from a very healthy oligotrophic down through mesotrophic, and you might have an early mesotrophic or a late mesotrophic, and then into eutrophic. Might have an early eutrophic, late eutrophic. Eutrophic is one of those, you see those lakes or those ponds with all of the algae and scum on them. So if you just sort of reverse those parameters and move in the opposite direction, you're moving, low dissolved oxygen, waters that you can't see through, you move towards eutrophic waters. And with that, I am now going to turn it over to Larry Marzicano. I'm sorry. From the Brawley Consulting Group.
Good morning, all. Thank you, Heidi, for the introduction. That was a great job. So, I don't know how many months ago, Heidi first asked, we had a group called the AER, and we did an assessment of a lot of the data that you guys have collected over the years, and we provided that. And then we made a recommendation about kind of re-establishing your monitoring program. And Heidi asked if I could come and do a little talk about monitoring. I've been doing monitoring of lakes for probably over 30 years now. So, and I also teach limnology, which is the study of lakes at Western. So a graduate program there. So I said I'd be happy to do that. So with that, we'll talk about some monitoring, how we monitor our lakes, and we'll talk about some general lake ecology in the process. So we have any doctors in the house? Any medical staff people? Anyone does medical? All right. So why is it always a good idea to tell your patients to go for their regular checkup? What's the purpose?
Preventive care.
Yes, you want to establish baseline. Yeah, you want to. Yeah, and is it true or not true that some people might have a different heart rate than others, which is normal, right? So you want to know some of these parameters for those that you love. You want to know what their blood pressure is and what their different their different blood work looks like, right? There's also another reason why you would tell your patient why it's time to go get to the doctor for a checkup, and that would be
onset of some disease or something.
Bingo! Yeah. So your lake is having some sort of change, and you want to be able to monitor that change, and particularly if you're doing something to try to help mitigate the problem. So unless you collect data, you'll never know on lakes. You'll never know that. So I know it's we didn't get the upstairs. So this is just a chart showing some basic vitals, and it's basic. And you can't see it, but it's over here. There's like age groups, and for different age groups, you might have different heart rates, different blood pressures, right? So you have that kind of granularity where you know for different age groups what the vital signs, what the ranges should be. And likewise with lakes. So let's go back. So again, you can't see it, but Heidi mentioned oligotrophic lakes, right? And she talked about low nutrients, and you kind of see oligotrophic all the way down to highly eutrophic. So the nutrients like phosphorus go from really low to really high. Secchi transparency, which is the clarity of the water, goes from really high, greater than 6 meters for these oligotrophic lakes, which I think you guys get here, down to less than a meter. And I work on lakes that have Secchi transparencies that are less than a meter, and you never want your lake to be in that condition, in that state. So the same thing applies. You have different age groups, and you have different sets of parameters that kind of define what that lake is going to be like. So it's good to know where your lake sits in this sort of matrix of variables. Just like the doctor back here, he would have a chart, and he'd be recording your variables, right? Okay, your blood pressure, your heart rate, all that stuff. You go out in the lake, and you're going to be doing your monitoring out there, and you're going to measure stuff throughout the water column. So this column is our depth, and I think I read somewhere that Cream Hill is 13 meters deep, or not so much?
I think it's 9 to 10.
9 to 10? Anyway, you measure things like temperature from top to bottom, dissolved oxygen top to bottom. There's a variable called conductivity we'll talk about in a little bit. Those are the sorts of things that you would measure on a regular basis to understand your lake. Where do we sample? Most programs that do sampling, they want to sample at the deepest part of the lake. Okay, so over here was a bathymetric map showing the bathymetry in the deepest part, and it's kind of in the middle, like most kind of lakes. Is the deepest part is in the middle, and so I used that to kind of figure out a point, just using Google Maps where that point would be, and Google will give you the coordinates, and you can kind of figure that out, put that on your phone, and get to that same point on a regular basis. Monitoring programs it's important to be consistent in how you collect your data as best you can. So you always want to try to sample at the same point, or at least at the point where you have the depth that you want. So if it's 10 meters depth tops, You want to go out and find the spot that's 10 meters deep. And I think just while I'm thinking about it, remind me, you guys have a website? I'll PDF this whole thing and you can post it, and so if people can't see these slides, they can see them later. Lakes go through seasonal turnover and stratification. So you guys are all probably very familiar with this just from your interaction with the lake. Middle of the summer, you can be swimming out there, water's kind of warm. All of a sudden you feel that cold pocket, like, whoa, where'd that come from? And that's because the lakes stratify. So the upper, when you go from spring to summer, those waters at the surface are heating up faster than below, and it creates this stratification. So there's this top layer on the top that is kind of mixed, all the same temperature. There's a transition layer. Try to point it out here. Top layer, transition layer, where temperatures are changing really quickly. And then down at the bottom, they're colder, obviously, and they're not changing that much. So that's typically the summer. Then you have, so we went from spring to summer, the fall, it turns over, right? The surface waters chill, get cold, they sink because they're now colder and denser. They create a circulation pattern, and then it actually stratifies again in the wintertime too. So all good information to know, particularly that summer stratification pattern. All right, so we covered, can I go backwards? Let's see here. Oh yeah, so how do you know where the deepest part is? It's pretty easy. You can use the map, or you can do what I do. Every time I go out to my site, I just have a field tape. I have a fairly large weight attached to the bottom, and I can lower it. I can find my depth, how deep it is.
There are a couple seats back here.
Yeah. That'll give you my maximum depth. So you know the general area. You go out and use your phone. If you have a GPS and you have a waypoint on your GPS or your phone, you go out and find your spot. You measure that depth. Make sure you got your 10 meters of depth, and then you move on. Secchi disc transparency. So one of my earlier charts talked about different kinds of lakes. Talked about the clarity. So you can't see his picture there, but there's Father. I think it was Monsignor Angelo Secchi, out in the Mediterranean, sailing in his big yacht, right? And he kind of made the observation that he would throw his plates over the side, and they would sink, these white porcelain plates, until it was like a certain depth they would disappear. And he realized that there was a relationship between that depth and what was going on in the water. And lo and behold, the Secchi disc was born, and there's no limnologist that doesn't go out, or anyone that works on their lake that's not measuring Secchi transparency. I brought one here. It's a black and white disc, right? You lower this thing into the water, you find that exact depth where you lose visual contact, right? Lowering, I can see it, I can see it, I can see it, I can see it. Oh, I can't see it. Well, I can see it. And then I grab it right at the surface of the water, and I measure that distance, right? And that tells me, it's clarity, but what's that clarity equal to? So it's going to tell us a lot about how much particulate matter is in the lake. Now, particulate matter can be both organic, like algae, and those algae are not to scale. Those are my little drawings of algae. If they were to scale, we might not want to go in the lake, right? And so you kind of get the idea, not a lot of algae. So the algae represent the organic component, the living in the lake. All lakes have algae. Oligotrophic lakes, Heidi mentioned, they just have less. And they have different kinds. That when you get into the eutrophic, a lot of nutrients, real bad transparency, a lot of cyanobacteria, aka blue-green algae. And that's the kind of situation you want to avoid. So the cartoon here shows us the one over on your left, right? Greater Secchi transparency. You can see the thing down at 6 meters, less algae. This one over here. Right, more algae. You don't see the Secchi disc as deep into the water column, right? And as simple as it is, it's a very, very, very good measurement of what's going on in your lake. We talked about measuring things at depth. Remember I had the chart that we'd be filling in if we were out collecting data, and it had from surface down to 13 or 10. Some of the things you'll be measuring that you have the equipment for, and I brought mine as well, are temperature. We want to know temperature and oxygen levels. So you can't see it too well here, but this is, I have another graph to show you, but here's our depth, right? And then I believe it's this one is showing us temperature. And I mentioned that top layer that's all the same temperature, right? Here's our temperature scale here. So they're all in the same range. That transition area, and then the bottom, which is all the same temperature as well, it's just colder. Look what happens to the oxygen when you get down to that transition layer. So boom, and then it jumps way off. I think this was Candlewood Lake back several years ago. So what happens is that transition layer creates a barrier, so oxygen can't diffuse down to the bottom. So bacteria are using up the oxygen while they're decomposing and cellular respiration, and there's no oxygen, and that can become an issue. We can kind of look at, based on those temperature differences, you can kind of see where you're going down, and now you're losing a whole degree of temperature per meter. The area where it changes the most, and water gets denser or less dense as water gets colder. Gets more dense, exactly, right? So at some point there's this density difference, and it's that density difference that creates this separation of the water masses. And at that point here, it's where you get the difference is the greatest, is where kind of you see on the other chart there, the oxygen just drops right off. There's no more oxygen because it's been used up in bacterial decomposition. And then if you do a lot of this, and you're regularly checking that in your lake, you can put together these really cool looking isopleth graphs, which basically are showing us depth over time. And this is from Bantam Lake. So this is showing us in the springtime, in the spring, all the same temperature. The lake isn't stratum, it's mixed. And then as we move, the top is starting to heat up, and you kind of see the red is even hotter, and you see these gradients and you can kind of see that. And then look at the bottom. See the purple here? This is temperature. This is oxygen. And you can kind of see what's happening at the bottom. How much of the water now is anoxic. And things happen.
I'll do this for you.
Oh, okay, good.
If that helps.
Yeah, and this can be a problem because there's processes that occur at the bottom that under anoxic conditions that contribute to the amount of nutrients in your lake. So it's good to know this. Also note this here, for this, I think this was last year, had all these anoxic waters and stratification, all of a sudden, boom, everything gets mixed. And that was that was between September and October. I think we had a big storm come in. So storms can come in and mix your lake from top to bottom easily. So under these anoxic conditions, you can have nutrients that are kind of accumulating down there, phosphorus just coming out of the sediments under those anaerobic conditions. And you get a big storm come in, mix the thing up. Now you got those nutrients throughout the lake and the surface waters and cause an algae bloom. Yep. Oh yeah, and I just kind of plotted where that depth of the greatest difference in density temperature over time. You can kind of see it kind of parallels. This gets bad here when you have these anoxic waters over that depth. That could be bad. So anyway, if you guys collect enough temperature and oxygen data, you too can make cool looking charts like this. All right, so let's see. I mentioned earlier specific conductance. Any mechanics? Anyone work on their own vehicles still? Back in the day? Yeah. So you have an electrical problem. You use an ohms meter, right? That would tell you how much current is the resistance, right? Electrical resistance. Conductivity is a term we use to talk about how well a current conducts in water. So it depends on how much salts are in the water. So lakes that really have high levels of salts will have higher conductivities. Well, someone say, Larry, who cares? Because I have salts in the water. All lakes do, right? So, but if it's changing fast, if there's a lot of change going on year to year, and you're seeing your salt levels go up, then that could be a problem. And there's actually a lot of work being done that's because of the increase in the use of road salts, for instance, we're seeing conductivity levels in lakes really start to go up. Double-edged sword. You know, everyone wants everyone to be safe. We all get that, but you know, they're looking at it that you got to kind of get a handle on that. So spin conductance, measure of resistance. Actually, it's not resistance. It's conductance of a solution electrical flow. They don't change much unless there's something impacting them over time. Yeah, and so you want to monitor those. It's just another variable, just another vital sign you want to know about your lake to see if things are changing or not. Good. A lot of times, conductivity is based on or is highly influenced by the geology of your area. So, for instance, I don't know if you can see it, but there's this blue area here. The Marble Valley, Salisbury lakes are really high conductivity lakes because they're in that Marble Valley. The bedrock, the geology there, the rock is very erodible. Likewise in the Central Valley of Connecticut. So high conductivity lakes, but if you're in the western uplands or the eastern uplands, typically the conductivity naturally is low. So I don't know what your conductivity is here, and I don't know what your geology is here either, but it's a good thing to know. Go ahead. How do we measure conductivity? So conductivity, I said salts, right? Well, there's really a handful of salts that contribute to most of the conductivity. Sodium, calcium, magnesium, and potassium. And then those are the ones that are the positively charged ion salts. The negative ones would be like chloride, the alkalinity ions, and sulfate. Sodium chloride. So I look at lakes all the time that are changing rapidly in their conductivity levels, and we can measure the individual salts. And a lot of times you'll see these lakes that are seeing increases in conductivity. It's the sodium and chloride that keep going up in conjunction with the conductivity that's going up. Okay. I mentioned, so here's our depth profile again. Then from the surface down to the bottom, a lot of times you'll see a conductivity profile. It's all the same up to a point where you get to where that stratification is, and then boom, the conductivity jumps off the chart. Gets really high, and that's because under those anoxic conditions we talked about earlier, things that are once precipitated out, oxidized and precipitated out, can go into solutions. So you get things like iron and sulfides and other kinds of things that are now ions that will increase the conductivity down at the bottom. So your conductivity profile under stratified conditions would look something like that. Good. A couple more slides here to talk about one of the things that we're always interested in, and kind of the bane of lakes in general is really two, right? So eutrophication, and Heidi kind of touched on lakes going from oligotrophic to the trophic. And trophic level just means how much productivity, how much primary productivity, algae growth, plant growth, does a lake support, right? So you go from oligotrophic, really low, to eutrophic. So, and that's often will be determined, particularly with the algae, by how much nutrients are in the water, right? So, and the principal nutrient for lakes, most times, 9 times out of 10, maybe 99% out of 100, is phosphorus. The other nutrient is nitrogen, but phosphorus is the one that really will determine the level of algae productivity in your lake and growth. And this is a classic, can't see it too well here, but this is from one of the experimental lakes up in the Canadian Shield. So this lake, they actually were able to curtain off one side of the lake from the other. So it's the same lake, but they just curtained part of it off. And on one side, they loaded with phosphorus, and the other side they didn't. Right? And so you can see what happens down at the bottom, on this side with all the phosphorus. boom, they get big algae blooms, while up here they don't. So one of the keys to keeping your lake healthy is to keep phosphorus out of your lake as best you can. So that means things like, when for fertilizing, we're using fertilizers that don't have phosphorus, because they make those now. And really, phosphorus is really only needed like for your lawn if you're starting a new lawn. If your lawn's already established, then you can buy those, I think they're 2407 or something like that, right? No phosphorus in those fertilizers. And your already established lawn will be fine and happy with that. So you want to keep phosphorus out of lakes. Making sure you guys you're not on any kind of a septic system here or sewer system. You're all septic systems.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
Yeah. Making sure that they're all functioning the way they should be functioning. Getting them pumped regularly. If your lawn in the springtime has one area that's looking awfully green and the grass is that tall versus the rest, then you might have some problems in your fields that might need addressing, and those are big contributors to phosphorus levels in lakes if they're failing. All right. We mentioned things change at the bottom of the water after it gets anoxic. So what we do is we'll take water samples, and you can measure temperature, you can measure oxygen, you're going to need a lab to measure the phosphorus and the nitrogen in your lake, but you can collect the water, right? So we brought this device here, when we do our demonstration outside, this is what you would use to collect the water samples at different depths. And it's a pretty simple device. I wish I had invented it. I'd be well beyond my... but essentially this bottle with these two plungers that open up and they connect here allows water to pass through this acrylic tube, and so you can lower that thing to 1 meter of depth because surface water. I want to know what's going on there, and then I also wanted to know what's going on near the bottom where the water is anoxic. So I can lower this thing, let's say 9 meters, and you send out a messenger and you'll see this, and then it triggers this, closes the plungers, and boom, you've captured the water that you're looking to capture at depth. Into the bottle it goes. Depending on clear bottles, brown bottles, things that are most water samples can go in these. And I think UConn provides you the bottles, if I'm not mistaken.
We just use Poland spring water bottles,
Oh.
and I never have enough. So if you want to contribute,
No, you know what? If you're paying for if you're paying for them to do the water, ask for bottles.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and actually, I've done both. I've ran an academic lab before. We always washed our bottles, acid washed our bottles. They're completely reusable. The commercial labs, they just recycle them. They don't have time for that. But yeah, UConn has a lot of undergrads that need something to do, so they'll clean the bottles and make sure they're nice and clean. The brown bottles are good for any kind of biological. So I didn't bring a slide, but I did show you the algae cartoon, right, with the giant-sized algae, and you can actually measure chlorophyll. So chlorophyll, you guys remember chlorophyll? All makes the plants green. The plants use chlorophyll to capture the sun's energies. Algae have chlorophyll too. So you can actually collect water samples and measure the chlorophyll, and it's a good kind of a surrogate for the volume of algae at that depth. And it's always a good one I find chlorophyll to be a really good indicator, very good indicator of the trophic level, how much productivity is actually going on out there. And UConn does that too. So that's actually good to capture that one. All right, where are we at now? You're up.
I'm up.
You're
so
up.
I'm going to just run through a couple slides at the end here to talk a little bit about. So thank you so much, Larry. That's about, any lake. Well, what's happening with our lake? The Lake Task Force was formed in 2013 by Gordon Ridgway. It's basically Ivan, Richard Griggs, Nancy Berry, who am I missing? Betty Spence. And you will see from our data collection, one of the problems with our data set is that we don't have enough data. We should really go out between May and October every month consistently. It's, depending on our lives, hard to get out. So part of what we're doing today is, if anyone wants to talk to us afterwards, if you're interested in helping to monitor, we can find something, you know, it doesn't have to be a big deal. So we welcome that. What we measure for is nitrogen, phosphorus, dissolved oxygen, temperature, and we also monitor vegetation. And based on some of what Larry has talked about, we're going to be adding a couple more things that are easy to do, like conductivity. We measure at the center of the lake at about 1 in 10 meters. This is just showing you temperature, a temperature column. So on the left, this is June, and where I've boxed is where that sort of thermocline is. So in June, you've got these temperatures, they're pretty similar, 19.4, 19.3, 0.2, 18.5, and then between 7 and 8, you move from 14.2 degrees centigrade to 11.6 degrees. So there's the thermocline. This was June 2023. And then in October, this October 2022, between 12.2 and 12.7 throughout the whole column, the lake is definitely mixed by then. This is just temperature, a longitudinal study. So what does it look like over time? Is our lake changing its temperature? And so we have on the left, it's July, and the slides are set up the same way each time. July on the left, October on the right. So we have 2017, 21, and 22. It looks pretty similar between 17 and 21, not really concerned. It jumps up in 2022. It could have just been, it's July. It might have been really hot. Was it really hot last July? So what we really want is we need to get July this year to see, do we have a trend or do we just have, you know, something, an anomaly? In October, we see no reason for concern. Basically by October, and this is about at depth, it's consistent, about 12.2, 12.3 degrees. Dissolved oxygen, I'm just going to say basically what you're really looking at is no trends, because what I'm always looking for is, do we have a trend? That's when we're concerned. Are temperatures going up every year? Is dissolved oxygen going down every year? That's when you have a problem. And so far, and this has been sort of verified by Larry's group, because we submitted all of this data to them about a year and a half ago, and they sort of confirmed, no, we don't see any trends in these, your lake is looking okay. These are our Secchi disk measurements. The lines are telling you anything that with clarity, remember this is the one where greater clarity is good. So anything above here is oligotrophic. Any measurements between these two are sort of early mesotrophic. If you have clarity less than this line, which is, I don't know, like 4, yeah. This is going to be eutrophic. So again, we see from a transparency perspective, our lake is looking pretty good. A few oligotrophic measurements, but mostly in the sort of early mesotrophic level. So again, looking good. Phosphorus, the lines are going to tell you the same thing, but now it's a little bit reversed, because remember, higher nutrients, less good. So anything up here in this area is eutrophic. Anything in this area is mesotrophic, and anything down here is oligotrophic. So what do we see? Well, the first thing, and again, it's July on the left, October on the right. And just looking at this shape, what we see is no trend. We also see a couple of crazy outliers. So in 2022, phosphorus was really high. Did I just grab a bad sample? I don't know. You know, similar.
This is at 10 meters too, right?
Yeah, this is at depth.
Yep.
So we do have a phenomena where phosphorus increases as you go down, and that's because phosphorus is coming from sediments. So we, on the one hand, we do expect phosphorus to be higher there. So, you know, I'm going to take a look at what we have at 7 meters. That should help me know if we have a problem. I've also been out, but UConn didn't get the data back to us in time to take a look at this in June. But you can see in July of 2022, it was really low. It was 17 right over there. You see July. So it doesn't really look like we have a problem, but we need more data. It's why we just need to keep monitoring. Similarly, nitrogen, I would say nitrogen, oh, this is the one place where it's like, that is kind of looking like a trend. Or is this an outlier? You know, again, this mostly is early mesotrophic, so that looks pretty good. But we definitely need more data, and I have been out already to get it. In July, it doesn't seem so high. So this, to me, this is that same measurement where we had the phosphorus that was really high. I think it's probably just a bad measurement. So that's kind of it. You know, I think Larry's talked about different things we can do to protect the lake. One that I really want to add is the importance of what we call our native assemblage of plants. We have a really great assemblage of plants on the lake floor. It's something we really want to protect, because when you take plants out and create that ecological niche, you can have invasives take up that space. So there's a lot of talk about, should we dredge, should we cut? You know, my really clear and definite advice is don't mess with what's not broken. It's not broken right now. I would say that I went out to collect some, actually my husband collected this morning, some plants to show you, to identify out here. And when he came back, he had pulled up milfoil. So I didn't think we had milfoil, but we do. So now the Lake Task Force is going to take a look at how, oh good, I'm glad Annie's back. I was just talking about no, I'm sorry. It was just that you and I had talked a little bit about the importance of the native assemblage, protecting our lake bottom, but I did go out this morning and pulled some plants to identify, and we pulled milfoil. So we have milfoil, and I think that we'll want to talk about how do we address it, but we should address it really surgically, very carefully, and try not to disturb all of the plants, because if you disturb them all while you're taking out that milfoil, it will be more aggressive and we will have a problem. So I don't think there's too much of it, but
Eddie, in case some people don't know that much about
I'm sorry. Thank you. Yeah, so we have a couple of really bad invasive plants in lakes in Connecticut. I'm going to ask you to help me, but
sure.
Eurasian milfoil is one of the worst.
Yep. Yeah, and I think I would highly encourage everyone here to make sure you go out and take a look at the milfoil so you know what it looks like. So if you see it floating out there while you're canoeing, take it out. It's Eurasian water milfoil is its common name. So it originated not in North America, in the Eurasian continent, got across probably in the aquaria trade, and someone threw it out, and it went from lake to lake to lake. And on the lake I grew up on Candlewood, it's pretty much dominated, you know, the shoreline areas. And what gets really bad about it is it will grow really fast to the point where it surfaces and creates this huge canopy. Boating through it is just a nightmare. You know, you boat, you throw it in reverse because your props clog. You know, so you want to make it can be really problematic. There's two different milfoils that are non-native, and there's several that are actually native, and they don't grow like that. They don't become invasive or problematic. But the one that we
and prevents oxygen from getting in, or what's the?
It can, because you know, again, when it gets to form those really dense canopies at the surface, that will be another layer of preventing diffusion of oxygen.
And also, it will die over time. So
Yeah.
when your vegetation dies and sinks to the bottom, as it decomposes, it takes up oxygen.
Yeah.
So that's how your water's anoxic.
So your lake bottom is really largely composed of all the stuff that's ever grown in your lake, the algae that's grown, the plants, and have died and just become naturally. That's the natural process, right? That over the millennia, you guys have touched it, right? It's like really like, ugh, you know, it's very slimy stuff. It's because it's highly organic, and the plants become part of it, the algae become part of it, and yeah.
Is there a way to neutralize or get phosphorus out of the lake, or is it?
No, but there are ways of neutralizing the ability of it from coming out of the sediments. And it only comes out of the sediments under those conditions when there's no oxygen there for like a protracted period of time. Like in the beginning, so your lake stratifies, the bacteria down there they're using oxygen and cellular respiration, decomposing, until they use it all up. Those bacteria are now out of business. Another group of bacteria come in that use like nitrogen compounds, and they use the nitrogen that's available for respiration. Somewhere down the path, the bacteria that use iron come in, and they start doing their thing. And a lot of times, a lot of the phosphorus in the sediment is bound to iron, where it's no problem to us, no problem to, but when it's anoxic and it gets reduced, it becomes soluble and kind of loads in the bottom waters under those anoxic conditions. And if you have a mixing event, which you do every spring and fall, but if you have it in the summertime where that whole water column gets turned over, you can have a lot of those nutrients. So they make there's products out there, they're very expensive though, that actually will create a flock on the bottom that prevent the mobilization of the phosphorus out of the sediments.
I will say one of the things that does take up sediment, take up phosphorus, are like the American reed burr, which we have along the side of the lake, and you can see it outside. I have a sample of it. Plants take up phosphorus, so it is another reason why we want those good plants down there. They take up phosphorus, and they also provide oxygen, so they help make keep the water not anoxic.
I also was watching some young man out there with his rod and reel, pulling up nice sized fish. You wouldn't have any of that without plants in the water, right?
Yeah,
because without habitat for the little guys to hide in, you eventually would see your fisheries kind of crash and
I'm going to make one more comment.
I'm
I'm going to make one comment and then just open it generally for questions. And that is, we'll get back to about taking care of the milfoil, because the thing that we have to make sure is it can reproduce by fragments. So what you don't want is like kids going out and pulling it, and they create 3 pieces but only bring 2 back. And then once we bring it back to the shore, we're going to have to dispose of it. So this is something we're going to be working on. And I'd love people to monitor and tell me where it is so that we can identify it. So I'm just going to say thank you, Larry, and open it up for any other questions.
Yeah. Please stay for the demo. We got all kinds of cool tools, and you can put that bottle you showed. Questions?
I have a question about fireworks and what it does in terms of chemicals in the lake.
That's a good question, because my recollection is there's a lot of phosphorus and those kinds of compounds. But in the grand scheme of things, it's probably not a lot. It happens like a couple days a year. So you have to understand, we think of phosphorus as bad. It's creating. It's natural. You can't, you take your kettle lake, that cube of ice that melted, right? Really clear lake. You can see the bottom, 15 meters, 20 meters depth, right? Well, eventually the leaves from the trees blow in. It's a natural process. It takes millennia for it to change. We have the ability of increasing the speed, the anthropogenic eutrophication. So, but in the grand scheme of things, what I worry about the fireworks so much is, our fertilizer use and the
Erosion.
Yeah, erosion along the shoreline. So erosion, sediments, right? But those sediments, like I said, they bind up iron, and if they get to if they eventually kind of get focused into the middle of the lake where it gets anoxic, and that's a natural process too, then those phosphorus can, become part of it. So, lake management is kind of like, you're trying to get the low-hanging fruit first, and then things like the fireworks might be next.
You mentioned a product that can keep the phosphorus.
Yeah.
Does it work really well or kind of well?
Really well. But let me give you.
And you mentioned it was expensive.
Yeah.
Can you give us a stat?
So we're going to probably the Bantam Lake folks that I work with are doing a project there. They hope to, and they're looking at 2.6 million.
I really cannot.
Thank you very much.
I cannot recommend quietly enough, our responsibility as being good
But
stewards
let,
of the
let me
lake.
give you
and-
some contrast here. So you guys are getting early mesotrophic, 5 to 6 meters of Secchi transparency, a wonderful measurement of how your water quality is doing. During most, good portion of the summer at Bantam, I'm feeling really good about 1.5 meters.
Wow. They have houses all around the lake and motorboats.
And they have, Bantam's a lake, so this whole business of loading from the bottom and stratification is all, there's a lot of factors that contribute to that. So this is a lake that is not quite as deep as yours. It's about, maxes out about 8 meters deep. So it's deep enough where it'll stratify. Okay, and you have that process, the oxygen gets used up, the phosphorus loads from the bottom. But it's not so deep that a fairly decent storm will come by and mix the whole thing up. Repeatedly, right? So stratifies, loads phosphorus at the bottom, mixes. Stratifies, loads phosphorus, I'm not sure about your lake here. You're a little deeper, so it could be that your phosphorus, if it's loading, and it looked like you're having pictures where at the bottom we were seeing elevated levels of phosphorus. Is it staying there? And then you have maybe a little bloom or little algae blooms in the fall once the lake turns, maybe. But that's why it's good to kind of understand those dynamics of your lake. The temperature profile, so you understand the stratification, and the oxygen profile, which tells you how long, because it's not instantaneous. The bottom is anoxic, went anoxic today. There's not phosphorus loading from the bottom today, right? It takes a while before that phosphorus starts to load. And by collecting that data on a regular cycle, you can kind of get that, understand? Now, if there was a question here, and then a question there?
When you take your samples, do you take them all at one time, like 1 month, or you take them throughout the year?
So,
And then the next question part of that is, when you take your samples, do you write down the effect of the environment that has happened in the past? So like last year we had a huge drought, and we also had the, I don't want to offend anyone, gypsy moth outbreak that basically defoliated all around the lake. So you're going to have, with that, you're going to have a lot of more nitrogen in the ground or the water because of all the poop from spongy moths.
Spongy moth, that's right.
I mean, you write that down
Well,
so you have that sample?
Yes, absolutely. So we take, there's the ideal and then there's what we do.
Yeah.
So our best.
I'm sorry,
Oh, no,
I think you could have
There's
explained
great,
this already.
they're great questions. Our ideal is at least to take measurement in May, July, and October.
Okay.
And last year, we've got this big spike in phosphorus and in nitrogen. So this could be a bad sample that I took. I took it too low and grabbed some materials that I shouldn't have grabbed. Or it could be the effect of drought, or it could be the effect of spongy moth. We don't really know. What we really look for is a trend, and what we don't see, like a trend in nitrogen going up and up and up,
Correct,
and we don't see it.
If next year it goes down and it was high last year, it could be a false measurement, but it could also be an effect of the environment where we had a drought.
Yes.
You're going to have less water, so
Yeah.
you're going to have more nitrogen
Yeah.
and phosphorus.
Yeah.
We know for certain that climate, and not even talking about just climate in general, it has when you have a drought season, conditions are a little different than when you have a lot of rain and a lot of water.
And you just said you took another sample today?
I took it in June, but UConn didn't get the sample back to me. But to your point, we cannot disentangle all of that, and that's why I'm not so worried. If we see a spike because there's drought, we don't even know why. It's only unless you see a trend over time going up, which we don't really see right now. It's in pretty good health as far as
I was looking at, I used to do a lot of work on candlewood, and I was noticing that the phosphorus levels near the surface were typically pretty consistent, that 15 to 20 micrograms per liter, and numbers don't mean anything. But every now and then I would see a spike, I'd see one. And I went back, to your point, and looked at use some of the great websites out there, Weather Underground, that you can get historical weather data, right? And I found that those spikes correlated really nicely with the periods of time when there was I think I used the threshold of 5 inches of rain in the last period of time, or some unit of measure. When there was a lot of rain, I saw that's when we were seeing. So yeah, those variables. And from Bantam Lake, they have the White Memorial has a weather station there. I mean, I just go right to there and I collect the weather data right from the. Is it sunny? Is it cloudy? That's going to affect your second transparency. So by doing that, measuring regularly, you learn the variability of what your natural variability. Like my heart will range, my heartbeats will range anywhere from high 50s up to God knows how high, and you understand the variability based on, was I exercising, was I not? And likewise, your second transparency is going to be affected by how much sunlight is out there, how much cloud cover is out there, but you get a sense of what that range is that you should be in.
So I just have a sort of couple of technique questions I'm curious about. First of all, what would the ideal number of samples per year be? So is it once a week would be like fantastic? Once a month is more than enough? What would that ideal be?
So for most programs that I've been involved with, it's usually a monthly, May to October. I have lakes that I've measured.
So you wouldn't need a weekly?
No.
Or would it be good if you did?
You could do.
No, really. I mean,
so remember the
I'll tell you, because I'll tell you the reason I'm asking.
Yeah.
Is so, for instance, during summers we have lifeguards, and I'm sure I'll get a couple of eyeballs. But if it is how long of a process is it? An hour?
Oh well,
to go out,
this
take a sample.
It's about an hour. But
no wait. So this is less than 10 minutes.
No. But in other words, for instance, if I were to sort of, pay a lifeguard once a week to go to the middle of the lake and do the process, so that we would have, readings. How long does that process take to get the readings for each time? An hour.
An hour.
About an hour. It's about an hour. You have to
And I
get
would.
A,
Yeah.
maybe an hour and a half because you have to get back and forth.
So the testing itself is expensive. So
It's not.
The lab stuff can be, and I wouldn't recommend doing the lab weekly. That's
okay.
That's overkill.
Once a month, but I love where you're going with this. But once a month, not necessarily lifeguards. It could be many different people. Yeah, but how? It would be great.
No, but I'm just saying.
It's about
like,
an hour,
You're gonna
and
have
it's
more
two.
people that have errors if you have like all these issues.
It's about $200, maybe $300 per test that I send to the lab.
Okay,
So that's
understood.
the most expensive thing. And right now the
Understood.
town does pay for it, although they only pay for about 3 months.
Temperature and oxygen is free.
Free, exactly. And
Free,
connectivity.
except we have only one dissolved oxygen meter, so if there was something that if I could ever ask for, it would be for a second dissolved oxygen meter, which are pretty expensive, so that I could leave it here and people here could do it.
Okay. So that was sort of.
Let me give you one of the quick examples. So back in the 2013-14, we saw blue-green algae raise its ugly head on Candlewood. We had a lake-wide bloom. People got people's attention, right? So in a couple of years, following that, we were seeing more algae blooms on Candlewood. So I actually created a program where they had there's 5 towns on the lake. They all have their swim areas with docks, and the lifeguards. I created a little app where they would take the Secchi disc, go out, measure Secchi disc before they open the park, and they used the app, and I could see trends just from I knew when we were going to get a bloom just by using Secchi transparency. So you don't have to do the whole rigmarole. You can get a lot of good information from that, and having that higher resolution with the oxygen meter is nice too. That gives you the ability to create those really colorful isopus graph where you see the temperature changing and the water column too. But it would be overkill to do the chemistry each time.
Okay.
Right back there, then
Well,
here.
how bad was the toxic? Did you have toxic cyanobacteria at Candlewood? Was it that bad?
So we created. I'm an adjunct at that Western there, and there was a faculty member there that was willing to take on a project where he set up his lab to do the toxicity tests. So we've been, and now that program has expanded across a lot of lakes in western Connecticut, and we rarely see levels higher. You know, they use a standard of 8 parts per billion, and most samples, even at lakes that are really have a lot of algae, are less than 1. Right? So, and that's the scary thing about cyanobacteria and toxic algae blooms is that not all cyanobacteria are creating toxins. You don't know. You just don't know, right? So the state uses a visual assessment. You go out there, looks like hell, right? And there's a film, you can see the algae on the water. Don't go in, right? Close the beach, right?
That's one way to find out if it's toxic.
And particularly, you know, and this can happen even in oligotrophic lakes, right? Blue-green algae are, I mean, they've been around almost for 3 and something billion years, right?
But it's spreading across the country much more today. With climate change, it's much more spread of toxic.
Yeah, we're seeing, we saw something at Candlewood where we have noticed, we didn't see a big temperature change. We looked at all the temperature data. But what we did see at Candlewood, or in the area, was over 30 years, we had lost by about 30% of our average spring and summer wind speed. Right? So think about it. Let's say you're warming up a bigger area. You don't have, wind is basically an artifact of temperature differences, right? That's what creates wind, right? So if you have more area that are warmer, you might have less wind. And less wind means that the water is not going to circulate as much. And cyanobacteria are very clever little critters. They actually have evolved the ability to regulate their buoyancy. I know we have a diver in the back. He knows all about buoyancy regulation. Right? These things actually create ballast and gas vesicles that, and they can actually, like Winoskopomik, very, very, very clear until you, and there's very little algae until you get to about 13 meters of depth. And then there's a really, really highly concentrated layer of cyanobacteria there. And that's where they stay. And they can regulate themselves so that they also have the ability to utilize light that can go deeper into the water column than other algae. So they can use the wavelengths of light that really transmit very far for photosynthesis, while the other guys can't. So they outcompete everybody. So, but yeah, we do see some of those kinds of trends.
Thank you.
Here than here.
Yeah, my question is for you. We had a study done many years ago. It was the very first one. And I think I was working on it. I think I gave the study to Gordon Ridgway. Do you have that study?
I have that. Dave, I didn't realize that was you. Yes, I have the study. So one of the things that we have is we have a baseline study that goes back to 1986. And that is an amazing thing because it really tells you, well, how are we doing versus all of those decades ago? Unfortunately, it doesn't have exactly the same parameters that we measure, but I can tell you, for instance, and like it also doesn't tell me what depth it was measured at. But the phosphorus measurement, for instance, was 33 milligrams per liter, and that is sort of basically kind of where we are now, or I think if we ignore our, in October, we're pretty much below that. Ignore these, what I'm going to call anomalies for a minute. But that, again, and then in July 2022, at 10 meters, where phosphorus is the most, we were at 17 milligrams per liter. So our phosphorus, although we have these anomalies, it hasn't really gone up. So having that baseline is really great to have.
There's also work done back by the Ag Station that actually collected data before that, the Frinken-Nobel study. So. Am I missing something good?
An eagle just
Oh,
awesome.
awesome. That's okay.
Distracted. That's
Wow,
That's a good distraction. I think there's this one and then over here.
And then maybe it's almost 11, it is 11:01, so we can take questions outside if anybody wants to stay.
Okay, this is fascinating, and I would love to help monitor stuff. Once a month, it doesn't seem like too much at all. But I was thinking about the different things that are causing things that we can maybe have some effect on. So I was wondering how we can get people to really make sure their septics are okay and really make sure they're not putting bad fertilizer in. But I was the most curious about the erosion. Should we be trying to plant certain things that, you know, help with the phosphorus? And the thing about the lawn near the beach, I mean, obviously it's kind of a hard thing when the sand, you get into the water with the kids, but how we can plant things, how we can help with erosion, and how we can really not just ask people, but try to use some muscle to help with really make sure your septic is okay, and your...
So I'll give you a few examples of some things that were done, and I use Candlewood as my, I spent, many years there, working there. There was a time, I think it was back in the 70s, when the town of New Fairfield came under order to create a sewer line because they were worried about the phosphorus in the lake. And sewer lines are not inexpensive, right? It's a lot of money for sewer. So they came up with a compromise, which was this septic walkover program, which was by ordinance. So everyone's property there was these semi-retired guys that they retrained. Remember I mentioned, the lawn that might be really high? Well, they would inspect everyone's property to see that from just the visuals, whether the septic looks like it was functioning or not. So that was one way of kind of trying to make sure everyone's septic system was working. They also everyone had to, somehow, they had a program where you had to show that you had your tank pumped once every 3 years, yeah, something like that. That's one. We also did a thing where we created in some of the towns, 3 of the towns around the lake, a watershed protection zone. So the area that drains to the lake. And in that zone, we kind of upped the requirements for permitting. So you want to expand the footprint of your home. Great. When you do that, are you going to increase the amount of impervious? Because the impervious surface is the hard surface, water is not, is going to run off versus, and if you are, they created a threshold, like you're going to be above 20% of your property is going to be impervious now. What are you going to do? Show me in your plan that you're going to submit how you're going to address that. And that became part of the zoning commissions, part of the zoning code, and what the commissioners looked at when projects came before them for permitting. And they didn't want to stop anybody, but they wanted to make sure that if they were going to increase runoff, that the property owner that was doing that was going to be responsible for that additional runoff. So, and there's all kinds of ways of doing that. The swales and rain gardens and rain barrels and so there was 2 ways we used. There was municipal level ways of trying to control, and also I mentioned before, the whole business with the conductivity and the salt levels. We put on a seminar series for the last 3-4 years at WestCon. Last year we had a woman from the Carey Institute over in New York, very, very knowledgeable about the salt thing, right, and how our lake's becoming saltier and more. And she was great, and all those presentations are online. You can look at those. But after she came on, we had the guy who was the highway manager come on to tell us what he was doing and how they were addressing the problem. So instead of throwing the hard salt on, they were creating the brine, and then using the brine, they way reduced the amount of salt. So I would highly encourage looking at those videos and see what they're doing to reduce those. Yeah.
I appreciate, and I think it's great that we know that we're not in bad shape, and I'm just wondering if there's anything more we should be doing now other than like this surgical milfoil thing you alluded to, but is there anything you would recommend that we do now to make sure we don't get worse? And I'm just wondering if we need some kind of a an action plan if things got worse? We don't want to be in a position where suddenly things are worse or there's a trend.
It's
and
a really-
then we have to stop and think,
Yeah.
oh, what do we do now?
It's a
So
good question, because we haven't had to face it at all, because luckily it has been relatively good news, so I've never had to like,
So the best action plans are the ones that you can change, right? You're always updating them, right? So you already have 2 items on your action plan: the milfoil for one, and updoing, kind of getting your monitoring program to the level that you want it. Those are good. Now, if something kind of turns up based on the data that needs to be looked at, and then you got another thing you're going to add to the action. You can also add to your action plan looking at ways of trying to use. I think she used the word muscle. And the other piece that people say, "Oh, Larry, you're crazy," but the educational component to this is invaluable. Because if you get enough people, there'll be enough people that kind of become aware of what's going on. Most people don't know, aren't aware. They love the lake, they're not aware of how it works, and they're not aware of what affects it. And if they do become aware, then you get a little bit more, the army grows, and that's what you want. You want to grow the army.
we're really lucky, because if you look out there, we have, our lake is insulated by a border of vegetation, of natural vegetation. And it's that vegetation that protects your watershed. If anybody's familiar with the New York City watershed, the way that they purchased tracts of forests, because your soil and your roots naturally filter your water out.
Yeah.
So one of the most important thing we can do is to encourage people, anybody who's has space on the lake, don't add any lawn, don't add fertilizers, don't, minimize your access to the lake, and people have really done that. So
Yeah, no, and it's not surprising when you go to a lake like Candlewood, or Bantam Lake, where the whole shoreline, or much of it is lawn down to the water, that you have problems. You reap what you sow.
I just want to close by thanking, and I lost the slide now, but by thanking the Cream Hill Lake Association for hosting us, Yelping Hill, who made a donation, the town of Cornwall, who made a donation, Cornwall Conservation Trust, and there were several individuals who made significant donations. So thank you all, and anybody who wants to stay can stay.
Did you want to mention if anybody's interested in helping sample?
Well, I think that was kind of the idea. Is
Okay.
write to the conservation where you're RSVP'd if you want to help monitor. I can send out an email to everyone who attended.